Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson is the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I am here to give a brief, spoiler-free review, my thoughts on the book. This book and the series in general, but primarily this first book, Gardens of the Moon, has a big reputation for being very difficult to get into. The scope of the world in Malazan is so utterly massive, and Erikson, he doesn't hold your hand. He'll take your hand, but then he'll take your other hand, and then he'll take a third hand that you didn't even know existed, and then all of a sudden, your feet are hands, and you have no idea what hands even mean anymore. That's what it's like reading this book. Erikson is clearly a talented world builder. The epic scope of the world he's built in this series, even from just the first book's perspective, it's massive. There are so many characters. They all have their own viewpoints, motivations, and they are pretty well realized. There are so many different elements to the world: cities, empires, landscapes. There are tons of different races and magic systems, and it all seems like it's probably pretty consistent. It doesn't feel that way because I don't know enough of the world to know what is consistent and what is just nonsense that was thrown in. I imagine it's all consistent, but it often felt like it was nonsense thrown in at random times. The bottom line here is, for me, this was a book that I had to read like it was a school book and I was doing homework. I was constantly having to read the book, then read a summary of what I just read, then listen to a podcast about people talking about what I just read, and then sometimes read the chapter again, and then sometimes read the summary again, and then I started to feel like I knew what was happening. That experience definitely contributed to my biggest criticism of the book, despite how difficult it was to read. That's fine, but my biggest criticism of the book is that I had very little emotional attachment to any of the characters, places, themes, plots, any of it. It just felt like I was being completely overwhelmed by the amount of information in the world building, the characters, the plot. Every bit of it was just so overwhelming that I couldn't cling on to a single bit of it. I had no footing in this world and thus no emotional grounding. And when things happened, I was just like, okay, so that happened. I'd often find myself more satisfied with the summary of events than the actual writing, because in the writing it took much longer and was much more obfuscated, and in the summary I was able to actually get the juice of what was happening and was a little bit more emotionally involved with the summary of events than the actual writing in the book, which is not ideal. Having only read this first book, I cannot recommend it to almost anyone unless you're deeply into world building and you don't really need an emotional attachment to the characters or the plot or anything like that. Then I would not recommend this. Yet I do plan to continue with Dead House Gates, the second book in the series, just to see, because I have heard, again, this is a very difficult book. You get through Gardens of the Moon and then maybe you can start to latch onto things. If I don't know that I can continue this series, unfortunately. As a huge fantasy fan, it would be really unfortunate if I wasn't able to complete the Malazan series, but I don't force myself through books too often, at least not whole series, if I'm not into them, so we'll see. And that's it. That's my spoiler-free little review reaction to Gardens of the Moon. If this is the kind of content that you would like to see, please let me know. If for some reason you're super into this book and you want to hear my spoilery thoughts on it, you can let me know that as well. And we'll see. I would love to do this more as I read more books. I read a lot of them. This one took me a long time to finish, mostly because I get interrupted by the Wheel of Time. But usually I'm able to read at least one book a week, and so I can probably just post these little short reactions, spoiler-free reactions to the books, and give you my recommendations based on what my thoughts were. So that's what I've got for you. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like button and all of the buttons. Hit the buttons. I'll see you next time.